Most people spend their lives begging for approval yet wondering why they stay powerless. In this video, we expose the fatal mistake that keeps the masses weak and reveal why real influence is built in the shadows, not in the applause of others. Throughout history, the powerful have never risen by pleasing the crowd. They rise by shaping it. They move with quiet intention, ignoring the fragile desire to be liked, and instead cultivate something far more potent, the ability to bend perception, direct emotion, and command obedience without raising their voice. Influence is not a gift, it's an architecture. It is crafted brick by brick through discipline, distance, and psychological precision. In this journey, we walk the hidden path that rulers, strategists, and manipulators have taken for centuries. A path where approval is a distraction, and power is the only true currency. If you are willing to detach from the comfort of validation, you will discover a truth. Those who do not seek to be liked are the ones others cannot ignore. Most people walk through life with an invisible chain around their neck, and the link that holds it together is simple: the need to be approved. You see it everywhere, in how people speak, dress, behave, and even betray themselves just to be accepted by those who hold no real power over their destiny. Yet they never question the nature of this trap. They never ask who forged the chain, or why they willingly tighten it around their own throat. You, however, are not here to live like the rest. You are here to understand the architecture of control. Approval is one of the oldest tools of domination known to humanity. It is softer than force, cheaper than bribery, and more effective than threats. A ruler of old required soldiers to maintain authority. Today, all he needs is to withhold his smile. People will break themselves trying to earn it. Consider how kings manipulated courtiers. They never rewarded obedience too quickly. They let the ambitious man sweat, wait, and wonder. A delayed approval was more intoxicating than a granted favor, and the courtiers, blinded by their hunger for acknowledgement, became predictable puppets. They revealed their weaknesses, their loyalties, their fears, all for a nod from a man who understood the true value of silence. You must ask yourself, how often do you trade your power for a moment of acceptance? How often do you soften your words, dilute your intelligence, or quiet your ambition just to blend in with the comfortable herd? Every time you do, you become slightly more visible to those who understand the game. They see your hunger, and hunger is exploitable. Psychology has a name for this: social dependency. The mind seeks belonging, even at the cost of self-respect. The approval-seeking brain releases dopamine, the same chemical that rewards survival. And because of that, the crowd becomes your captor. Not through force, but through your own desire for emotional comfort. But here is the truth the powerful always understood. The moment you depend on approval, you are no longer acting from strength. You are reacting from fear. History is full of leaders who mastered this principle. Caesar did not win Rome by being loved. He won it by commanding loyalty through decisiveness and ambition. Respect came from action, not from appealing to the pleasantries of the Senate. And when the Senate grew jealous, they used the very weapon you still allow others to use against you: public approval. They crafted narratives, stirred emotion, and turned the crowd into an executioner. Those who chase approval are ruled by it. Those who withdraw from it bend the crowd's will without having to touch it. Think about your own life. Think about workplaces where the loudest manipulator becomes the boss's favorite while the quiet, competent worker is ignored. Why? Because manipulators understand something crucial. It is not the value of your work that decides your fate, but the value of your perceived loyalty. They study what the authority figure wants to hear and deliver it with surgical precision. They craft a persona, then weaponize it. Meanwhile, the approval seeker waits to be recognized and dies a slow psychological death when recognition never comes. You must learn to invert this dynamic. When you no longer crave validation, people become uneasy. They lean in. They analyze you. They wonder why you move differently, why you speak with restraint, why your attention is selective. Suddenly, your indifference becomes their obsession. Silence becomes your weapon. Distance becomes your leverage, and the crowd that once controlled you now waits for your signal. This is the psychological shift that begins the path to influence. The moment you stop needing approval, you gain the freedom to shape perception with intention. You choose when to be warm, when to be cold, when to reveal, and when to withhold. The power no longer sits in their hands, it sits in yours. But this understanding is only the first step. Influence is not born from the number of people who like you, but from the number of minds you quietly shape without their awareness. Most individuals misunderstand this principle. They believe visibility equals power, that noise equals authority. Yet the greatest strategists knew the opposite. Power thrives in the unseen. So let me ask you directly, whose thoughts do you quietly influence? And whose influence do you obediently absorb without question? This is where the real game begins. Influence is an architecture of perception, carefully built, patiently reinforced. You do not need the crowd to love you. You need the crowd to believe what you need them to believe, and belief, unlike approval, can be engineered. History is filled with figures who mastered this craft long before psychology gave it a name. Consider the rise of Cardinal Richelieu, who shaped France not by winning popularity contests, but by steering perception from the shadows. He understood that when people think an idea is their own, they defend it with a loyalty they would never grant you openly. So ask yourself, how often do you plant ideas subtly, instead of announcing them eagerly? Most people broadcast their intentions loudly, exposing their desires, fears, and weaknesses in the process. But those who seek influence move differently. They leave traces, not declaration. They bend a conversation subtly, redirect a conflict quietly, or guide someone's decision without ever claiming ownership. Have you noticed how certain people lead rooms without speaking more than a few calculated sentences? Their influence is not loud. It is gravitational. People orbit them, adjust to them, reflect them without realizing it. This is the essence of perception power. Others move while you remain still. In modern life, this principle appears everywhere. In workplaces, the silent observer often steers decisions more effectively than the loud advisor. In relationships, the person who controls emotional tone controls the direction of the bond. And in social groups, the one who speaks last frequently shapes the conclusion everyone thinks they reach together. Influence grows in the gaps others overlook. But to build this kind of power, you must first detach yourself from the emotional hunger that drives most people. If you act from insecurity, your influence collapses. If you act from calculation, your influence expands. This is why rulers through history crafted personas deliberately. Even when their true motives remained hidden, a controlled image becomes a weapon. People respond not to who you are, but to who they believe you are. So ask yourself, what image do you allow the world to see, and what perceptions do you let them assume? Influence requires intention, not transparency. And when you master that intention, approval becomes irrelevant. But understand this clearly, once you begin shaping perception, you must do it with discipline. Manipulate it. Expose themselves when they push too hard. Influencers succeed because they let others walk willingly into the belief they constructed. And now you must consider the next step. Once perception is shaped, how do you maintain control without revealing the hand that guides it? The answer lies in the kind of detachment that frees you from emotional noise, allowing your presence to feel deliberate rather than desperate. When you stop fighting to be understood, people work harder to understand you. When you stop explaining your intentions, people invent narratives that serve your position. Absence becomes a form of communication. Mystery becomes a shield. And your silence becomes the canvas on which others paint meanings that benefit your influence. This is the psychology behind perceived authority. People elevate what they cannot easily define. The less accessible you are, the more value people place on your attention. But remember, influence is never static. It grows when handled with precision, and collapses when taken for granted. So, now the question turns sharply toward you. Once you've begun to shape perception, how do you leverage it to command respect? You will discover that respect is not granted through kindness, charm, or compliance, but through the calculated weight of your presence. And as we move into the next principle, you will learn how strategic detachment separates those who merely influence from those who quietly dominate the minds of everyone around them. Strategic detachment is not coldness for the sake of cruelty. It is precision. It is the art of standing close enough to observe the battlefield, yet far enough to remain untouched by the chaos that consumes lesser minds. Most people drown in emotional noise because they cling too tightly to others. They seek closeness as a form of security. But closeness, when uncontrolled, makes you predictable, reactive, and weak. You, however, must be different. You must learn to remain present without being possessed, connected without being captured, detached just enough that people feel your presence, but never your dependence. History offers countless lessons in this discipline. Consider the rise of Queen Elizabeth I. Surrounded by enemies, pressured by advisors, and suffocated by the expectation of her court, she survived by mastering emotional distance. She revealed little, kept her intentions concealed, and cultivated an aura of strategic inaccessibility. People projected onto her what they wished to believe because she never gave them enough clarity to anchor their judgments. Ask yourself, how much of your suffering comes from giving people more access to your emotions than they deserve? When you respond instantly, you signal eagerness. When you explain yourself too quickly, you signal insecurity. When you give your emotional energy freely, you signal availability. And availability, in the psychology of power, is death. Strategic detachment forces others to reconsider how they approach you. It compels them to weigh their words, regulate their tone, and measure their expectation. They begin to pursue your attention because it is scarce, not because you demand it. This scarcity generates psychological gravity. People move toward you instinctively, adjusting themselves to your temper. Think about someone in your life who never reacts impulsively. Someone who remains composed, deliberate, and difficult to read. Their calm unsettles you, doesn't it? You lean in, you listen more carefully, you wonder what they're thinking. That tension, the uncertainty you feel, is precisely what gives them influence. Now, imagine cultivating that same effect within yourself. This is the difference between emotional presence and emotional surrender. Detachment does not mean apathy, it means control. It means choosing your emotional expressions as strategically as a general chooses his battalions. Have you noticed that the people who dominate conversations are rarely the ones who speak the most? Instead, they are the ones who speak last, speak slowly, or withhold their reactions until the moment matters. Their restraint elevates their words. Silence becomes part of their authority. Strategic detachment teaches you to weaponize silence. It also teaches you to weaponize distance. In relationships, whether personal or professional, the moment you become too accessible, the value of your presence collapses. Humans are programmed to desire what they cannot fully grasp. When you maintain a slight distance, you create a psychological vacuum, and people, by nature, rush to fill it with attention, speculation, and effort. This is not manipulation. It is structure. The same structure used by commanders, by monarchs, and by every modern power broker who understands that influence cannot exist without boundaries. Let me give you a real-life example you've likely witnessed. In every workplace, there is someone who is friendly but not familiar, approachable but not clingy, helpful but not eager. Others respect them more, trust their judgment more, and seek their approval more. Why? Because their emotional independence makes them appear competent, confident, and self-contained. Their detachment signals strength. Meanwhile, the overly involved, overly emotional, overly available colleague becomes invisible. Their presence loses weight because they have diluted themselves in the crowd. Now turn inward. Where have you diluted yourself? Where have you allowed emotional closeness to become emotional captivity? Where have you traded influence for comfort? Detachment restores that balance. It gives you space to see clearly, to think strategically, to respond instead of react. And when you master this discipline, you discover something powerful. The less you need from others, the more command you hold over any interaction. But detachment is only half the equation. Having distance is one thing. Knowing how to use that distance to shift power dynamics is another entirely. Because now that you've learned how emotional distance sharpens your influence, the next question becomes inevitable. How do you use that distance to challenge others and make them respect you more for it? Controlled disagreement is one of the most underestimated weapons in the arsenal of power. Most people flee from conflict, terrified that even the slightest resistance will cost them approval. But you are no longer seeking approval. You are seeking influence, and influence requires that you learn to challenge others in a way that elevates your presence rather than diminishes it. Ask yourself, when was the last time your silence made someone stronger and you weaker? Controlled disagreement is about reclaiming that ground. It is about showing that your mind is not for sale, your voice is not easily swayed, and your respect cannot be purchased with flattery or fear. When done correctly, disagreement does not create enemies, it creates authority. History proves it. Consider the court of Louis XIV, where nobles constantly competed for favor. The ones who clung to the king's every word became forgettable ornaments. But those who disagreed strategically, offering measured resistance at key moments, were remembered. They signaled intelligence, independence, and inner strength. They became advisors, not ornaments. This is the psychology of dissent. When you challenge someone with precision, they must reassess you. They must measure you. They must respect you. Control. Disagreement begins with timing. You do not contradict someone impulsively, for that reveals emotion. You wait. You observe. You let them speak fully, revealing not just their beliefs but their insecurities. Then, once their position is clear, you introduce a fracture small enough to seem rational, sharp enough to assert your presence. A simple phrase can shift the entire dynamic. I see your point, but have you considered the consequences if the opposite were true? In that moment, you become more than a participant. You become a force. People instinctively trust those who bring complexity to simplicity. They lean toward those who refuse to be swept away by the crowd, and they defer to those who hold their ground calmly while others rush to agreement like obedient followers. Controlled disagreement creates psychological distance, the very distance that powerful figures cultivate. Imagine you're in a meeting. Everyone nods. Everyone agrees. Everyone blends into a single amorphous voice, and you, after a pause, introduce a different angle. Not aggressively, not emotionally, just confidently, with clarity. Watch how the room shifts. Watch how people turn toward you. Watch how authority gravitates to the one who dares to think. This is not rebellion. It is strategy. People do not trust blind loyalty. They trust the person who demonstrates they can say no with intelligence. But understand this clearly. Disagreement must be clean. Not personal. Not petty. Not tangled in hidden bitterness. The moment your disagreement looks emotional, you lose the advantage. The moment it feels impulsive, you lose credibility. The moment it turns into conflict for its own sake, you lose power. Controlled disagreement is an art of precision. Think of the skilled negotiator who questions terms others accept blindly. Think of the lawyer who stays silent until introducing a single sentence that destabilizes the opponent's case. Think of the strategist who tests loyalty not with obedience but with reason. Why do you believe this? Defend it. When you disagree with purpose, you become a mirror one that forces us to confront their own assumptions. And if someone feels threatened by your disagreement, good. They now recognize that your mind is not in their possession. But here lies a deeper truth you must confront. When you never disagree, people assume you have nothing to contribute. When you disagree recklessly, people assume you are difficult and chaotic. But when you disagree with discipline, people assume you are powerful. This balance is the mark of an independent thinker. Controlled disagreement also exposes the hidden dynamics in your relationships. Those who become angry at your resistance reveal their desire to dominate you. Those who listen reveal their respect. Those who adjust reveal their dependence on your judgment. Disagreement becomes a spotlight showing you who values power over truth, who values truth over ego, and who cannot tolerate any threat to their fragile identity. Now ask yourself, in your own life, how many people have you allowed to speak without challenge? How many weak ideas have you silently endorsed? How many times have you betrayed your intelligence just to avoid friction? Controlled disagreement liberates you from that prison. It marks you as a thinker, not a follower. It makes your presence felt even in silence because people know your agreement has weight, not desperation. But disagreement is only the beginning. For once you learn to challenge others intelligently, the next step is even more dangerous and even more powerful. How do you rise through social hierarchies without anyone realizing you're climbing? Every hierarchy, no matter how modern it appears, still functions like an ancient court. There are rulers, there are advisors, there are loyalists, and there are pawns who believe their obedience will someday turn into power. But the real operators, the ones who rise silently, steadily, and without resistance, are those who understand how to climb without appearing to climb. You are here to become one of them. The greatest mistake ambitious people make is announcing their ambition. They show their hunger too openly, reveal their strategies too quickly, and expose their intentions before they hold any leverage. And once others sense that hunger, they will cage you, sabotage you, or place you exactly where they can keep you controlled. So ask yourself, how many times has your desire for advancement revealed itself in ways you did not intend? To rise without being noticed, you must learn to move like a shadow, visible enough to seem harmless, useful enough to be kept close, and restrained enough to avoid threatening anyone above you. This is how powerful figures throughout history rose from obscurity to influence. Consider the young courtiers in Renaissance Italy. The ones who flaunted their intelligence were eliminated by rivals. The ones who flaunted their loyalty were used but never trusted. But the ones who listened, watched, adapted, and blended in these were the ones who ultimately shaped the decisions of rulers. They rose not through noise but through subtle positioning. Climbing a hierarchy is not about proving your superiority. It is about becoming indispensable without appearing ambitious. Most people climb vertically trying to impress those above them. You must climb diagonally, building alliances beside you, strengthening those slightly ahead of you, and quietly gathering influence where no one is paying attention. Think of the modern workplace. There is always one person who seems to advance effortlessly. They don't brag. They don't beg. They don't compete loudly. Instead, they provide value quietly in the right places, to the right people, at the right moments. They stay neutral in petty conflicts. They help without attachment. They learn from everyone while revealing little of themselves. And before anyone notices, they are the person others depend on. Dependence is the currency of invisible power. When someone depends on you, they protect you. When a group depends on you, they elevate you. When an entire system depends on you, they cannot remove you. This is why your first step in any hierarchy is not visibility, it is positioning. You position yourself so that people trust your discretion. You position yourself so that you become the quiet solution to their problem. You position yourself so that your absence creates more discomfort than your presence. But positioning alone is not enough. You must also avoid the mistakes that sabotage silent climbers. Never attach yourself to a single patron or authority figure. Their downfall becomes your downfall. Instead, weave your influence through multiple channels so your rise cannot be halted by a single misfortune. Never take sides in emotional disputes. These conflicts burn quickly and leave scars. Instead, remain the calm observer, the person both sides secretly respect, because you never wasted your reputation on petty battles. Never reveal your long-term intentions. People sabotage what they can predict, but they fear what they cannot understand. Move with soft steps, steady progress, and an unreadable expression. Let others think you are merely diligent, not ambitious, and never underestimate the power of being underestimated. There is no disguise more effective than appearing ordinary. In every hierarchy, people fear the loud competitor. They ignore the patient strategist. They watch the one who brags. They overlook the one who listens. They guard themselves against the obvious threat, then open their gates for the one who seems harmless. You must become that harmless figure until the moment your influence is too deeply rooted to be challenged. Think of it this way. The strongest vines in a forest do not rise by force. They rise by weaving themselves quietly around the tallest trees, using their strength without provoking their hostility. Now reflect on your own environment. Who holds real power? Who believes they do? Who acts as if they do? And how can you weave yourself through these layers without creating a single ripple? Once you master this, you will no longer climb the hierarchy. You will become part of its structure. But there is a higher form of influence, still one that does not rely on action, alliances, or even strategy. Because the most dangerous power you can wield is not movement. It is silence. Power is rarely lost in a single dramatic collapse. It decays quietly, like a fortress whose stones loosen one by one until the final wall falls with barely a sound. And if you have ever wondered why some individuals rise with astonishing speed only to crumble just as quickly, the answer is simple. They never learned to guard what they acquired. They assumed victory was permanent. They believed momentum was strength. And they forgot that every triumph paints a target on their back. So let me ask you directly, once you gain an advantage, do you know how to preserve it? Or do you expose yourself through arrogance, comfort, and naive trust? History is filled with men who grasped power but failed to maintain it. Consider the fall of the Roman general Belisarius. He was brilliant, victorious, celebrated, and yet, because he placed his fate in the goodwill of those above him, he ended his life in disgrace, stripped of influence. His failure was not on the battlefield, but in the subtle war that came after, the war of perception, loyalty, and strategic vigilance. He mastered the sword but ignored the shadows. This is where your own psychology becomes your greatest enemy. When you taste success, the brain floods with reward, lowering your guard. Your standards slip. Your awareness dulls. You begin to believe you are safe. But no individual is ever safe. Not in courts, not in corporations, not in families, not in friendships. Ask yourself who benefits if you fall, who waits for your mistakes, who studies your weaknesses more closely than your strengths. People pretend to admire you while quietly measuring the cracks in your armor. They smile while tracking every moment you hesitate. They praise you while preparing to claim what you have built. And the moment you relax just briefly, they strike. This is why the old masters of strategy insisted that every ascent must be followed by greater caution, not celebration. When a prince secures a new territory, he fortifies it at once, tightening his control before the locals can rebel. Yet modern individuals do the opposite. They achieve something: status, wealth, influence, and immediately broadcast it, seeking validation instead of security. They turn themselves into open books, readable by anyone with patience and predatory instinct. Never do this. Guard your progress like a secret fortress. Hide your wins behind humble words. Let your movements be gradual, quiet, almost invisible. Power that appears effortless invites imitation. Power that cannot be traced invites fear. You might think this level of calculation is excessive, but reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever confided a plan to someone only to watch them adopt it as their own? Have you ever shared a weakness that was later used against you? Have you ever trusted too early, too deeply, or too openly? People do not betray you when you are weak. They betray you when you are rising. A clever manipulator once told his apprentice, "Never reveal the full map of your ambitions." He understood that most people cannot harm what they cannot predict. Uncertainty is a shield. Mystery is a weapon, and silence is often stronger than persuasion. There is a psychological principle behind this. The more information others gain about you, the more accurate their strategies become. They can anticipate your decisions. They can imitate your tactics. They can undermine your plans before they fully form. To maintain power, you must remain partially unreadable. Not opaque, simply unpredictable enough to keep others off balance. Think of wolves in a pack. The one who survives is not always the strongest, but the one whose intentions are hardest to decipher. The same rule governs human groups, though we dress it in manners and polite language. So, if you intend to hold what you earn, cultivate disciplined obscurity. Let people wonder. Let them question. Let them misjudge. The greatest advantage is the one no one sees. Stay alert for what follows. And now, as you stand at the edge of this principle, understand this. The next keynote reveals the most dangerous truth of all. What happens when your silence becomes more powerful than your actions? In the end, influence is never loud. It is quiet, invisible, a shadow that bends another person's choices without ever revealing the hand behind it. You now see the truth. People are not controlled through force, but through their own desires, their fears, their need to feel understood. When you guide these impulses, you guide the person, and they believe the direction was their idea all along. Ask yourself, how many decisions in your life were genuinely yours? And how many were planted by someone who understood these principles long before you? This is the real game, not power taken by domination, but power granted through subtlety. If this lesson unsettled you, good. It means you are beginning to see the architecture behind human behavior. The architecture most people remain blind to. Now I want to hear from you. Comment your thoughts below, your experiences, your insights, your questions. Subscribe if you want more strategies drawn from the darker corners of human psychology. And share this video with someone who thinks they cannot be influenced. Let them discover how wrong they are.